Hi, welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm your host, Mark Graben. Our guest today is Matthew Neal Davis. He's the author of a book titled The Art of Preventing Stupid. So we're going to have a lot to talk about today, provocative title that it is. But Matthew is an attorney and an entrepreneur. He's grown his firm, Davis Business Law, over 1,000% in 6 years, earning a rare spot on the Inc. 5,000 list with offices from Austin to Kansas City. With more than 25 years of experience, Matthew now teaches business leaders how to, as he puts it, turn vulnerabilities into opportunities using what he calls the strong protected business system. Matthew and his wife, Allison, have 5 children, including one adopted from Russia and the youngest adopted from Ethiopia. And he leads the heavy metal band called, get this, Geriatric Steel. They have songs including Get Off My Lawn and Teenage Daughter. So with that, Matthew, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. Yeah, for plugging the little band. My wife is like, you're serious? I said, yeah, that's my retirement project. I'm going to go play rock festivals because these songs just write themselves, you know?
So do you do cover tunes or all originals?
We've been doing all original songs, but we can play cover songs. We'll pop out your Judas Priest or your Def Leppard or whatever. I've been practicing Photograph by Def Leppard lately. I decided to relearn that after. It's one of the first songs I learned 40 some years ago. So.
Yeah. So focused a lot on 80, you're influenced by 80s heavy metal.
Yeah. That's what we grew up on. And we did a deal at one of our firm retreats. And my son goes, Dad, why don't you just write songs about middle age and, life about in hard rock? And I'm like, son, that's genius. And, they just start coming out, teenage Left on the Lights and, going down fighting and stuff like that. So, yeah, we have a lot of fun with it. So.
It sounds fun. What instrument? I'm a bit of a drummer, so I'm always curious what instrument you're playing.
Yeah, I still have my Flying V that I bought, in 1983 or 4, working in a bakery. So that's the rule at Geriatric Steel practice. You only get to play Flying V guitars. So I have 2 of them now.
Fun. Well, there's a lot to talk about. I want to talk about your book and some of the advice that you give business owners. But as we always do here, Matthew, the main question: what's your favorite mistake?
I think the way that you're supposed to say this is, I'm an Eagle Scout, okay? And I really didn't realize how valuable all those lessons about leadership are in running a business, and how just speaking from that position of leadership, and we tie that into Ken Blanchard's situational leadership theory, how powerful just good leadership in your organization, particularly ours as a service firm, can be in helping people grow and helping people become successful in an organization. Because we take lots of attorneys from sort of congruent lines of business in the law, plug them in, work with them, work in a very organized way with them, and help them become really successful here. And, it took me about 7 or 8 years of running this firm, because I went from just a pure solo practice to having a 15 attorney firm. And I was finally like, okay, this is how you do it.
So in those early days, in those 7 to 8 years, were there particular mistakes that you made by not realizing those lessons from Eagle Scouts and from scouting, from situational leadership?
Yeah, just in hiring and not understanding. First of all, there is some element that we have to find people with certain skill sets that are successful here. And one of them really is just because our attorneys are sort of the general counsel for their clients, that they have to have the ability to go down to the courthouse and box somebody's ears. Okay. And, it's one of the sine qua nons, if that's the right word. And so, understanding that, but then also understanding how we can take people and first of all, hiring the wrong people and not understanding how to look at the skill set of what they need. But then also that when we have people that have a strong enough skill set for us to grow, how to use the situational leadership theory of, okay, first, everybody starts as an excited beginner, new job, new toy, right? Mm-hmm. But then when somebody hits what they call a frustrated learner phase, being able to, on just a given skill set, being able to take them and help them grow through that. So, for instance, Lexi's just down the hall, and she was getting frustrated about some stuff. She's a newer attorney with us. And I said, Lexi, here's the deal. You're just struggling with 2 of these skill sets of the 7 you need to know. And some of the ones that the older people, I've got a 60-year-old that you run circles around on closing leads and on staying retainer positive. But, here's a couple deals. And she's like, wow, yeah, it's really that simple, isn't it? And it's really empowering when, first of all, we're providing the leadership. But second of all, everybody's talking about the elephant in the room. And everybody goes, lights on. Wow, we can deal this. We can tackle it. We can grow. And it makes for a lot more successful firm, a lot happier employees. And guess what? Turnover in employees is really expensive.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So massively cut down our turnover.
And what would you say are some of the direct lessons? I quit Cub Scouts after 1 year. So what were the lessons from scouting, yet alone achieving Eagle Scout, that are most applicable? Maybe I don't know what those connections would be.
Well, it's, you could say, and I've never thought about this question this way. Maybe it's, okay, here's your badges, here's your skills you need to know, right? And there's only so many things that you need to know and you need to master to become really good. But, from our standpoint, in a more general sense, it was just knowing that, okay, here you've got to be the leader of the troop. You've got to be the one to organize stuff. You ultimately have to be the one to take responsibility, and you have to take responsibility for teaching and raising up everybody on the team and the troop and the company, on the tribe. When you're the senior patrol leader or whatever, that's your job. Your job is to take responsibility for the growth of the team and for the growth of everybody on it. And we used to be in a building where my scoutmaster had an office up at the top, and he would always sort of give me trouble about this, but and make me say the scout oath on the way up the elevator, by the way, which is pretty funny. But no, it's, and the whole concept is just, that these sort of corny things that you think are corny really do bleed over into life and running an organization, taking responsibility for it, and helping everybody reach their full potential.
Yeah. And so then the situational leadership piece is recognizing where somebody is at in those cycles or what their need is in the moment.
Yeah, and Blanchard, who was most famous for just the 1 Minute Manager book.
Ken Blanchard, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. But then he's got but really his sort of seminal book about how he thinks and what he built his company on is called Leadership Meets the 1 Minute Manager. Mm-hmm. And that just clicked with us ultimately because, you can run a professional service firm by coercion. We don't want to do that. Right. Just being a jerk. Or by abdication, meaning just kind of letting everybody do what they want, right, which doesn't do anybody any good at the end of the day. Or by getting them committed to growth and to achieving really good competency in their skill set. So, he teaches to break every job down into a set of skills, a skill set, right? So, for instance, we have 7 mapped out for our attorneys, and then you look at them from, as I mentioned, the first 2, which excited beginner, maybe don't have that right, frustrated learner, 3, cautiously competent, and then 4, self-reliant high achievers. Okay. As a leader, you just leave the self-reliant high achievers alone.
Right. Don't get in their way. Don't stifle them. Right.
Yeah. You just check in every now and again. But guess what? This little matrix is great to use when you're hiring people. So I just did interviews in Kansas City last week and hired one of them. And, I started out and I said, listen, here's where you are on our chart. And we talked about it like adults. And he goes, you're completely right. This is exactly where I'm going to need help. And I'm like, we're here to deliver it. We're going to make you successful. As long as you're willing to put in the effort, you're going to be a success here. And so that's really powerful in helping your people grow, because it gets everybody focused on the things you need to work on.
Yeah. Maybe one last question about your growth in your journey with the firm before we talk about the book and some other things. Where did you ever worry, or did you ever think it was a mistake to grow beyond being a solo attorney into building a firm? That's a big change.
I did not. I was at a point that I had one big client that was 40% of my revenue, and that's just not a very comfortable place to be when you're the breadwinner for a family of 7.
Sure.
And so I was at a law firm management conference, and I got the bug, and I went home and I said, we're going to start a law firm. And my wife said, okay. And I went over to the credit union and rounded up my old paralegal and said, let's go start a law firm. And we bought an old house, and we just did it. So we kind of burned the boats.
Right. No going back.
Yeah. And it was, we had a trying week with some stuff last week, and my wife was with me, and we were in Kansas City, as I mentioned, doing interviews. And as I was leaving, going down to Wichita, she said, wow, that's weak. I said, well, it's a lot more exciting than sitting around our hometown arguing with dumbasses. So sorry about my language, but
it's okay.
I was like,
not a mistake. It's not a problem. So tell us about the book. I mean, the story behind the book and what you mean by preventing stupid. I guess you could have gone with preventing dumbassery.
Yeah. Well, look.
What do you mean by preventing stupid?
Okay. Well, the one of the premises there is most of the stuff we get into is preventable, or that you can prepare for it, right?
From a legal standpoint, you mean?
From a life standpoint, if you want to get right down to it. And I say that because my brother-in-law read the book, and he's a real cad. He tells everybody he's a homeless veteran, right? I'm like, no, jerk, you're a 787 pilot that lives with your girlfriend. So anyway, but he's like, this is good life advice. But yeah, the book does veer towards law, but I start with this principle. And look, I hate seeing people get into trouble and just waste their potential. That's just something that drives me bonkers. And so let's start here. I say there's 3 things that the sources of your problems come from. Okay. One is going to be catastrophes. And that's where there's synonyms for any of these categories. You could say disasters. It's where the world sucker punches you because you weren't ready. Okay. And in that category, my position is the same stuff happens over and over again. There's nothing new under the sun. People get in the same mixes, and there's ways to break it down by looking at, for instance, your business system. You could, and that's what we'll talk about now. You can look at your personnel, your plant, which would be your facilities, your marketing, your sales, right? And you can go, okay, this is where I'm about to get, or it's likely that something could go wrong. Okay. So for instance, we were at strategic planning the other day, and we break this down, and every quarter we run the system, and we said, what's our personnel problem? Right. And we said, this one attorney in Kansas City is going to quit this quarter, right? And we happen to have a coach there, and the coach goes, how do you guys know that? And we go, because we have models from when young attorneys quit, particularly young men, because they have this tendency to go, grass is greener, right? Guess what? The guy quit the next day.
Yeah.
Well, and the point is, we were prepared for it. I already had the marketing campaign or the recruiting campaign going.
Yeah.
And, I hired his replacement within 2 weeks. So, okay, that could have been a catastrophe, but we were prepared for it.
Ready.
And, we couldn't prevent it. But, that's your deal with your catastrophes. And what we teach too is to ask smart questions by breaking down categories. So like, what can go wrong with the management? What can go wrong with your facilities? What can go wrong with your team? And that's a whole, if you brainstorm that, that's a whole lot better way of dealing with, as we could say, where you're going to get whacked, right? Now, that's one category. Second category, and you can do the same sort of brainstorming, is where are you ignorant? What don't you know? Okay. And, often that's pretty embarrassing, right? But, on the other hand, Harvey McKay, who wrote Swim with the Sharks Without Getting Eaten Alive, great business book. One of his great lines was, I can't believe how stupid I was 2 weeks ago. Right? That's your constant in business if you're doing your job, because it means you're learning something, right?
Right. You're improving. Yeah.
Right. And so, but your ignorance, the way to fix that is education. And guess what? The tools that we have at our hands are insane. And let me give you an example of this. So, we have been doing a lot of upgrades to our recruiting, hiring, onboarding, and coaching. We call that RHOC. It's through line in our HR. And again, this is embarrassing, right? Because I'm learning stuff and we're getting better all the time. But so I'm looking at this, and we're working off these shared spreadsheets, up in OneDrive or whatever. And I'm happy with it, but I'm like, gosh, I just feel like we're inventing the wheel. Right. And when I feel that way, I go, somebody has had this problem before. Somebody has invented the solution. We're going to go learn about it. Right. Okay. And so the point is, to start with, when there's this concept that people say, you don't know what you don't know, I think that's nonsense. Okay. Because, and a sort of nonsense. But what I mean by that is, if you want to know what you don't know, look at where you're frustrated. It's not that hard to figure out, in the sense of, I'm sitting here going, why am I inventing this wheel? Why am I pushing this up the hill? Somebody's already done this. Look, we've had civilization for 3,500 years, right? And there have been lots of solutions created to these problems. And when I'm having a problem, that means I need to go learn something. So, I go out, and my wife actually grabs me after I go, Trello, Asana, Monday. And my wife's like, come here, dummy, let me show you how to do this. Right? And pulls me over, shows me her Trello that she's been using for 10 years to run the house.
Yeah.
And I'm like, good Lord, what a moron I am. And so, I've got um, my daughter who works for us and Chelsea over in Tulsa creating our Trello boards to run the whole system, which is just going to be infinitely better for us.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and we did the same thing with our firm dashboards here recently, which, blow people's mind when they see them because, just we did really my daughter did an excellent job of setting these up, and law firms just don't have this sort of data.
Mhm.
Okay, that's ignorance, and you could say this is the knowledge you lack. So we go from catastrophes where you're going to get whacked
Mhm.
to the knowledge you lack, and you got to figure it out, right?
Right.
And then number three is sort of a vogue thing. I'm in Oklahoma City, and James Clear, who wrote Atomic Habits,
Right.
is speaking to EO here in Oklahoma City tonight.
Wow.
I think I'm going to miss it. But the third I call ineptitude. It's really ill discipline.
Mm.
Is saying it a different way. It's meaning you know what to do and you aren't doing it.
Right.
Right.
Mhm.
And and if you will do what you know you're supposed to do, whether it's brushing your teeth or
Flossing for me, but the dentist, like, I know I should floss. I
it,
struggle with that.
I started getting really good about flossing, and I went in the other day, and the dental hygienist said something to me nobody's ever said, and it still freaks me out. She says, "Your tissue looks so beautiful." What the hell are you talking about, Mary?
Right.
Your tissue looks so
You
beautiful.
have such great
Oh,
gums. Yeah.
yeah, I'm a little freaked out about that. But okay, and just maintaining the disciplines you're supposed to do. And by the way, when you go from knowledge, then that bleeds over into knowing what your disciplines or should be, right? So, for instance, here's again, I'm an open book, and I'm happy to talk about my mistakes, right? Particularly on your podcast, right?
Mhm.
And so we know that we have to really strictly control the Google, right? Because when we're breaking into a market, we are ready, willing, and able to use Google Ads.
Yeah.
Okay. But if you just give Google your credit card, they're like a kid in the candy store.
Yeah.
And they're happy to provide me with a completely ridiculous $400 click.
Mhm.
And 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 there if we leave Google on broad match, that we'll just get all sorts of ridiculous calls. We're a business law firm, and we'll get calls for the people that want to sue McDonald's for
Yeah.
a hair on their hamburger and
Yeah.
all this crap. And on an occasion last year when we went into a market, we forgot to really tighten that down.
Oh.
And, for about a month, we just got garbage.
Mhm.
And we were like, what in the hell's going on? Right. But it's our fault. We knew what to do. I mean, we run really tight Google campaigns, and we sort of perpetually, every now and again, we'll let a marketing agency piddle with our stuff for a while, and we invariably fire them because we do a better job.
Yeah.
Um,
So the first time you made that mistake was type 2. You were ignorant,
mhm.
but then you learned from it. But then sometimes we forget or fail to follow through on what we learned. Like, I mean, do you think about literally putting together a checklist the next time you enter another
Mhm.
market of like,
Oh,
let's
yeah,
make sure we don't forget that the next time?
absolutely. Yeah. And that's exactly the sort of thing you do. And
Mhm.
by the way, on all that, the best learning tool in that I use all the time is YouTube. Just absolutely fantastic. I mean, You wouldn't believe what I did with my daughter's Mustang this summer after watching a bunch of YouTube videos. And so, the standard mechanic would have been proud of me. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah. Anyway, the idea is if you will, those are the sources of your vulnerabilities: your catastrophe, your ignorance, and your ill discipline or ineptitude. Okay, and if you will deal with those, if you will pay attention, take some time to brainstorm, and then either prepare, prevent, learn, or get disciplined, what happens is you're the strongest player in your market on the field. You're the guy that plugged the holes in the boat. You're the one that, as we say, if you deal with those vulnerabilities, you can capitalize on your opportunities because you're not running around playing defense.
Sure.
And to me, we teach this to a lot of our clients, and we'll go through this with them. And okay, great. But the other side of the coin for us is we love to work with clients that are on offense because it's so much more fun than dealing with pissed off, cranky clients who, are getting sued or just having unpleasant things happen in their lives.
Right.
And, Noelle and I are going on, we like to call it a field trip today, down to see one of our clients. And, we'll do this with them. We keep on offense, and, we put one of their deals on the front page of the Wall Street Journal business section a couple of years ago. And we do not make many, partly because of them and partly because of our advice and counsel. We just don't make a lot of mistakes, and they move fast.
Yeah. Well, then hopefully there's an opportunity to learn fast. I mean, the book title, and again, we're joined by Matthew Neal Davis. The book is The Art of Preventing Stupid. I mean, you talked about ignorance, and like ignorance is different than stupidity. I mean, I think you can fix ignorance by learning and moving forward. I mean, are there certain business mistakes that you would categorize as stupid as opposed to being born out of ignorance?
Yeah, and to be clear, my broad idea there is, look, not dealing with your vulnerabilities is what's stupid. It's not taking your job as defending your business is what's stupid. And look, I'm not talking out of school. Andy Grove, what was that? Only the paranoid survive.
That was his famous book and phrase, right?
Yeah, it's the same idea. And I'm just giving people a system. Look, your business mistakes, the easy ones, the basic ones are get your customer contracts done correctly, right? Have your leases and your vendor contracts reviewed. Okay, I'm leasing new space in Dallas, and I'm picking that apart because commercial leases in Dallas, because our friends in Texas, they like to pretend like they have really great fair law, but it's pretty insane, really. And it's crazy that whole state. Anyway, the Texans and it's fine, but and get your employee contracts done right. And for gracious sakes, get your LLC set up in a sensible way, particularly, pardon my English there, particularly if you are going to have multi-member LLCs, meaning common ownership. And by the way, we talk so many people out of getting into business partnerships because they are generally a really ill-advised move, unless you have sophisticated players.
Yeah.
Unless it's like, okay, I've been in business, I'm going to invest in this thing. But oh my gosh, we talk people out of that all the time.
A lot of the people on this podcast have talked about a story involving getting into partnership with the wrong people.
Well, and I tell people I'm, as you may have figured out, I'm pretty indelicate about things. And
Yeah.
I just say, listen, that's like signing up for marriage without sex. You want to do that, amigo? Right? Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, because well, what people do is, they're afraid of the learning curve. Okay. They're afraid of their own ignorance. And they don't want to take responsibility for learning things. And so they'll see this other person or be talking to this other person, engaged with them, and they'll go, oh, this person can overcome my shortcomings. Well, maybe they can for a little while, but it's probably just a little plug. And it also just detracts from our responsibility as business leaders to continue to learn, to continue to grow. So yeah, it's kind of a lazy way of frankly thinking that they're going to deal with their own ignorance. And we see some of the craziest stuff. We've got a case down in Texas right now where a couple did exactly this, and they let this other guy set up their company without an attorney. And so there's some sort of joint ownership of this company, but the dummy only issued one share of stock. Right? Yeah. So who in the world owns the one share of stock?
Yeah.
Right? And, it's just a complete disaster. And, they did this because they were apprehensive about the learning curve they had. But you've got to face the learning curves in your business. And I like to say, you just got to start beating them like piñatas until you get the candy.
Yeah. So you talk about systems, Matthew, and I'm an engineer. So talk about systems, talk about asking what could go wrong. Like that's pretty deeply ingrained in our education and profession. So I love references to that. One of the things that you write about and practice, and you've trademarked this, the strong protected business system. I'd love to hear about that.
Okay, what that is, and anybody can go over to our website. The forms are all at the resources tab. And what it is, part of it is what we talk about in the Art of Preventing Stupid. That's the Business Immune System Report. It's a brainstorming tool based on those 3 categories and the 7 systems that run every business, which are going to be, your management, your personnel, like I sort of alluded to them earlier, your metrics, I'm going out of order, your marketing, your sales, and I've now confused myself. But anyway, it's that. And what it is, it's a brainstorming tool because you go, okay, where are we ignorant about our marketing? What do we need to know? Where are we frustrated, right? What's holding us back? What's the barrier? Where's the learn? Okay, You brainstorm these, and you can also do it. There's another tool in there that looks at it just from really a more exterior angle, and that's the strong protected business. I can't remember the name of it because I've been doing lots of stuff the last 2 weeks. I've been in 5 states. Yeah. So anyway, they're similar, but a little bit different views. And then you got to look at what are the most likely things to go wrong? What are the urgent things? You got to prioritize. It's basically like Eisenhower's matrix. What's urgent, what's important,
right?
And sort that out. And then you make yourself an action plan. And sometimes, guess what? You just pick the low-hanging fruit because the easy stuff just gets you momentum.
Sure.
I've
seen that. Yeah.
Look, it's really, I am just passionate about teaching people deal with these vulnerabilities because, you're either on offense or you're on defense. It's that simple. It's a binary choice. And if you will spend a little bit of time dealing with your defense proactively, you're going to spend a lot more time on offense and your company's going to be a lot more successful.
Yeah. One thing you write about in the book, just to dive into systems a little bit more, you talk about business and circular systems. Tell us what you mean by that.
Well,
you don't mean circling the drain. That's a bad.
No. And I learned years ago, and I really wish I knew who developed this thought. So this is not original thought, but I learned from a business coach. First thing you got is you've got your production. Okay, you got what you do, and so we do legal advice. Okay, if you do engineering, you do engineering. Then you got to have your people to do it. Okay, and then you have to and you have to measure what you're doing to know that it's being successful, right? And then you got to have a plant or facilities to do it in. Okay, and I probably should have put that facilities before the metrics. Mm-hmm. And then you got to get more work, right? Or get more opportunities. And I am adamant that marketing is different than sales. Okay?
Yes.
I'm all soapbox about that. So you got to get the opportunities. That's what marketing is.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got to sell it. You got to close the deal. Okay. And then your sales go back to your production. You got to produce the results. You got to create the solutions. And so when you start to think about your business that way, that's what we built the business immune system report around, is where can those catastrophes or ignorance or ineptitude, where are those going to go off the rails in those systems? And understanding business that way is really powerful from my perspective, because it allows you to ask the right questions about where things are going wrong and where you can apply your energy to fix things.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to ask you about your firm, and as you've grown to become a team, how do you think about culture and the importance of that? Is it connected to systems? Does it help support systems?
Yes, and I probably should have hit that in the earlier at your initial question, because we're a very culture first firm. And look, the law business, this will surprise you, Mark, is replete with narcissists and sociopaths and the general cluster B personality types. Okay,
that's not just on the TV.
No, it is not.
Okay,
and we have very decidedly built a culture to exclude those people.
Mm-hmm.
And because guess what? I know them. I can spot them. I went to law school with them. And the reason they're drawn to the law is because the law then becomes a license for them to just act out against the rest of humanity. Okay.
Yes.
And it's truism. And I was just working with a book coach about a new book about that, really a recruiting book.
Mm-hmm.
And so we really play ourselves as a refuge against those people. For our attorneys, I tell people I'm in the attorney lifestyle business, because if I can attract great attorneys, give them a great place to work and a culture that protects them, fosters them, and lets them have autonomy to master their craft, then they'll take care of our clients. Right. And so we are, decidedly about culture. We use Mark Murphy's book, Hiring for Attitude, which is a fantastic book. Mark's become a friend and mentor to me. And we use that to really make sure we're hiring people that match our culture.
Yeah.
And it's been a really powerful tool for us, and a great way to protect our culture from bringing in people that we don't need to.
Yeah. So hopefully you haven't made a huge hiring mistake in that sense of hiring one of these narcissists, as Bob Sutton would call them. I don't know if you know his book, The No Asshole Rule.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, yeah. But I don't know that.
Have you managed to not hire a narcissistic asshole?
Ever since we really got intentional and got some good lessons from our friend Mr. Murphy.
Yeah.
So we've been burned a time or two early on with that.
Yeah.
And you get burned, it's time to learn, right?
we all make mistakes, and it's better to learn from them. That's one of the overarching themes of the podcast here that you're right in line with.
Yeah, and we're very intentional about that. We have Wednesday. That's WINS day, where we talk about our wins, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have Friday firm huddle, and that's where we got our butts kicked, and we want to put it on the table and talk about it because we want to learn from it.
Yeah, that's I think a great point to end on. Thank you for sharing that. Let's and we learn from the times we get beat. We can learn even from the wins. What could have gone better? What are we going to do better the next time? I appreciate your spirit about learning and making sure that we bounce back and move forward. So I'm excited to read the rest of your book. It is The Art of Preventing Stupid. Matthew Neal Davis. I'll make sure there are links in the show notes to learn more about Matthew, his firm, the book. I look forward to that future book, because I think that's such an important thing for any type of business, any entrepreneur. I think would appreciate that need to be intentional about culture.
Yes, and makes a big difference with us. It makes my life a lot more fun too.
When you talk about the attorney lifestyle, you've got, it sounds like, the entrepreneur lifestyle that you wanted. Yeah,
I'm enjoying it. Some days it's more challenging than others, but all told, it's a good adventure,
Yeah. And it's so cool to hear about the band. I know you're busy. How often do you get to play a gig somewhere?
We haven't played in a year or so because I had a hell of a year last year. I lost my COO, died of heart attack, January 31st. So play probably later this year. So we're working up the songs, and we'll probably go finish another. We've got a good demo tape, but we'll probably go do another one. And so it'll probably be later this year.
Are you able to get any of your original songs out on Spotify or something?
We haven't, but we need to. We really need to. So
why not?
Yeah, I should. I've got this thing called a law firm. It eats up a lot of
You get a law firm, a family, writing. I get it. So, Matthew, thank you so much for coming on and sharing some of your reflections and I think your important lessons. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, my pleasure, and have a great trip. You mentioned you're going, so I'm not going to tell on you. So
that's all right. I'm going to do some workshops, and we're going to talk about learning from mistakes down in Australia and Auckland, New Zealand. That's no secret. But I mean, that'll have already happened, I think, by the time the episode is released. But
well, if you're flying American, my brother-in-law could real easily be your pilot. So
I'm flying a 787. Yeah. Well, let's talk offline, because maybe I'll get to say hi.
Thank you, Mark.